This is Motivation. I'm Lori Joy Kingwell.
And I'm Chrissy Van. We're two dreamers on two wheels inspired by our community.
And celebrating the voices we're just lucky enough to discover along the ride. So if not already, like, subscribe, follow along, do what you gotta do to not miss an episode.
In the riding community, the mantra "ride your own ride" is often repeated. The saying holds the essence of individuality, emphasizing that personal choices of how you take the road is yours and yours alone, for better or for worse. It's also a reminder that each rider must chart their own course, a journey that evolves over time but remains uniquely theirs to navigate. Being an authentic rider goes beyond choosing the right bike, speed, route, terrain, and destination. It's a personal commitment driven by individual preferences and motivations. This ethos extends into the broader context of our lives, where we continually discover what resonates deeply within us, aligning with the core of our authentic selves and how we move through this life. Living authentically transcends trends. It's a dynamic and transformative journey that requires sacrifices and a willingness to embrace uncertainties. It involves navigating the moments when we realize our well-worn path might not align with our true selves, mirroring the daily encounters where we uncover what truly makes us tick. This episode explores the nature of authenticity, recognizing that it's not just about staying true to yourself, but also adapting and responding to the ever-changing environments and relationships around you. In our discussion, we're going to talk about Merriam-Webster's word of the year for 2023, authentic. We're going to unpack its beauty and complexity, exploring the nuances of living authentically, because ultimately, it's not just about reaching a destination, it's about crafting a life that resonates with the distinct roar of your own engine and acknowledging the sacrifices that often accompany that journey. Welcome to Ride Your Own Ride. This is the Motivation
Podcast. We're talking about authenticity, and why we're talking about it is because you said it was the buzzword of 2023. I just
that
said
and the
2003.
Riz.
And the what?
The Riz.
Thought you said the whiz.
Do you know the Riz Whiz?
No, I want to know. What is it?
I'm realizing I'm not Gen Z, so now I'm probably going to give a bad definition. But like, if something like the Motivation Podcast, that's the Riz.
I don't know if that's good or bad. Now it's even more scary. I have no idea.
Like those leather overalls that you got from the Bay that everyone loves, they're the Riz.
They're the Riz. I've never heard. And that's the word of 2000, another one of the main words?
Yeah, I think it's Oxford took on the Riz.
What?
Yeah. There's a whole language. We've reached that age where there's a language that's not ours.
I get that, like, things are said that I don't understand, but I've heard it enough that I realize that they're swirling about in the world. But when you hear like one of the top words and you've never heard that word, I'm out of
in fairness, the word that we're talking about today, authentic, I've realized I didn't necessarily know the definition either, and I've used that one an awful lot.
You and I have used it numerous times in our episodes. Anyone that's listening is like, oh yeah, you've probably used it. You've heard people use it many a times. But I think, and what we want to talk about today is what are some of the things that, you know, it actually means and where it becomes much more of a buzzword, or where it's way more complex than this just idea of just like, be yourself, be yourself. The thing that automatically comes to mind in and around authenticity and why it's more complex than just like, you just like listen to self and be that self, you know? You've got everything from like human behavior that makes it so complex, right? Like it is hardwired into us to belong. It is hardwired for us to compare. It is hardwired into us to have all of these different thought processes and emotions behind them. And then you add in aspects of like the family you were raised in, the culture you were raised in, and things that highly influenced your wiring of your brain and how you think and perceive the world and your reality that you live in. And then you add in a little soul and spirit in there that's driving you, and there's that, you know, that kind of knowing that's like, turn this way, the whispers, the smack on the heads, the push off the cliffs until you do listen. And so you have all of that is just, you're just waking up in a day trying to do you and trying to match up, you know, what you're thinking and feeling, and then align that of how you acted out that day in work, friends, family, all those different elements or environments. And so it's not as just that simple as just like be yourself, just be yourself. Well, that all said, like just to kind of kick us off.
She did research.
I took screenshots of a computer and I'm that's how old like I just saw the zoom in too.
I was like, oh,
that's also not just when you know like at all times. So just like a couple examples. I'm going to grab like being transparent in your relationships. And so being open and honest with how you're feeling or what's kind of going on rather than, you know, shutting it down to keep the peace or not make things complicated or awkward, because as we all know, that's uncomfortable having those kind of conversations. Showing your vulnerability, right? Having the authenticity includes ability to be vulnerable and open up about personal struggles or challenges, right? We have that like need for perfection.
On the face. Yep.
Yeah. The mask, the like, I'm doing well. I'm doing, you know, to be clear, I'm not doing so well lately.
I'm being authentic with you.
I'm being serious.
If you've known us long enough, we never lie anyways.
I'm so mentally exhausted. I'm physically exhausted. Like in today in the gym, I was like, the point is you're just here. And I did like half the weight I normally did. And I was like, the point is you're just doing
you
the
and
reps.
I are like a fulcrum though, because again, if you're hopping
Sorry,
on.
well, I don't know what that word means.
Like a seesaw. It has a
like
fulcrum
a
in the
seesaw.
middle.
Yeah, okay.
So it's like when one is up, the other is down.
Learning
like I
so
do
much
feel
today.
like we do so many patterns like that.
Yes.
Because like since people joined us last, as we know, I was Hot Mess Express where we left off.
Yes.
And
I was
now I'm sort of in the swing of
dancing in the
life.
stars.
So much so that like I messaged you after I saw you yesterday because our next interview episode is with G Namazi.
Right.
And on my way home, once again, I had all these amazing stranger interactions. And this whole week has been that theme. Like I've entered this state, but it's funny when your energy changed. Like just a little sidebar story, but I walked in to a mall that I didn't know existed up the street. I've lived here for 2 years. I walked in, I was like, what? And then I was like, there's a grocery store.
By mall, it's like one of those small town malls.
Oh, yeah.
In the city. Like it's not
hard to
a
find
major.
here.
Yeah, for sure.
And so there was, of course, an old elderly gentleman sitting on a bench. And he just goes, you walk with such hope. And I was like, thank you, sir. I'm actually feeling quite joyful today. You have a great one. And then it's like I walked into the store and had a lovely time. And then I left. I was like, good day. And it was just this beautiful interaction. And my whole world has been a bunch of those.
He would have like thrown holy water on me. If
Right.
I came in right now, like where I'm like, I shouldn't be around humans right now. I'm exhausted. I'm mentally not where I need to be. And so I'm actively trying to keep my interaction with humans at a minimum.
Yeah. Untethered is the word you used yesterday, which stood out to me.
Like not grounded, untethered. And that's okay. Like it's one of those things. I was reading a book this morning, and kind of one of the paragraphs that popped up was like, there's a time to inhale and there's a time to exhale, and you have to slow down enough to inhale. And I'm like, I need to inhale. I've been doing so much exhaling with like work and with travel and adventure and taking risks and stuff, and it's all been beautiful and wonderful, and it was all the right stuff to be doing at that time. But it was exhaling. It was taking all that I had learned and all that I accumulated. And I was in a state of like, and that was like, to pull it around to what we're speaking to, like authentic to what
this is how we do.
Yeah.
This is authentic to what the motivation is. We're like, wait a second, I've got a story.
I was like, I forgot what we were talking about, but here we're back. And so it was. And like right now, I think that's the other thing too that makes it a little bit confusing, and where you do the masking is that because I am a type of person that I'm a cheerleader to friends, and I'm, and I live out loud, and I try and live authentically to how I'm feeling inside. And so when I'm on that other side where I'm a bit more like, I don't want to be around humans. I don't want, and they're just like, ooh, like there's a weird feeling. There's a feeling of like, I need to show up a different way inauthentically to protect my friends and family from feeling like worried or like, you don't need to worry about me. I'm just fine. I'm going to do all the things. Like that's not a worry. I'm not worried about me. What it is though, is that you feel as though you get so much more positive feedback when you're living high or you're on that mountaintop or you're feeling that, like, you know, you're exhaling. But when you need to slow down and inhale and you need to kind of go insular and, you know, pull back, or you're not as vivacious or bubbly as you normally would be. Doesn't mean I don't still have gratitude. Doesn't mean I don't still have appreciation and I'm not still like, you know, in a good space as far as it goes of like in the right space that I should be in. But you feel as though at times I felt that pull factor to mask it. And I'm like, no, I don't need to mask it so that everyone else is comfortable around me. Now, do I know that I might be a little bit more closer to like being grumpy? Yeah, that's why I'm like, I shouldn't be around people right now.
Yeah.
I shouldn't have opinions on too many things because it's going to come from a little bit more of a graded, exhausted place, right?
Well, and even I just like within our hiatus, like when you were on adventures and travel, I was doing exactly that. I inhaled deeply for weeks on end.
Yeah.
And I basically just told, because we had a very social summer. It was an awesome summer. But by the end of it, I had a very like pivotal release. It was at the Women's Moto Summit, which is happening again next year. I already have my ticket. Little shout out for that if you're going to be in British Columbia. It was incredible, but I like leaned into everything and just processed so much emotion. Yes, I was on mushrooms, which really helped facilitate that a little bit. I feel like the wall pressed down. But after that, it was this realization that I'd need to hit the brakes and take a good chunk of time to inhale, because it's like I had left my job and then got into this new thing and then didn't really know what I was doing. And then it's like push and created amazing things, but like falling into a lot of the same patterns of not necessarily celebrating the wins, and then more. And then when it's not going well, it was challenging. And then the social life was crazy until I was just kind of like, all this change has happened and I actually haven't taken a pause at all to become really centered and feel, I'm going to use the word authentic, which I almost want to make synonymous. And I know it's more that new agey term, but I 100% agree with it, because it was like my spiritual self that I think was screaming the most about alignment to figure out what that looked like. But again, I'm always available. I find for the most part, like, you know, I'm kind of, and you're very much the same, that like when things are going on in people's lives, you tend to be the person that people pick up a phone and call, etc. And I'm so happy to be that. But it was like that, like full out close for business where I was doing my own thing. I definitely did let people know I love that I was around. And I will say that I've had some relationships change around that too. Like, because maybe it is that people don't know how to react when you're the one that's taking an inhale, when they've never seen you take an inhale, but you got to do it.
And being, I think, transparent about it too is what's so important. And that's where, you know, one of the kind of definitions in and around authenticity is like being clear as well, and like matching what you say and do and are doing, whether that, you know, like we spoke to, or I think I spoke to it, and if not, like your belief systems or your value systems. But also if you like value honesty and if you value transparency, you're going to be transparent in those moments of saying like, hey, I need to go inwards, or hey, I need to do those things. And you hope as well that person's going to be authentic in sharing their viewpoint or how they're feeling about it or not, or whatever it is kind of thing. But it is that kind of in the context in this moment that we're speaking to, is like you have to be just okay with a bit of like the messiness that comes along with it, which, to kind of like switch gears but segue, is the other part of being authentic is really asking yourself what does resonate with you and why, in and around, you know, belief systems or your values or the way you want to live life, or all, you know. And a lot of times you do have to have a contrast of the way you were raised, of the way, you know, the culture maybe that you were raised in, and maybe that completely aligns with you. And maybe that you're just like, that really does feel like it brings out the best in me. And that's a beautiful thing. Wonderful. You were born into that and it seems to align, like lucky duck, because that's not often what kind of does take place. But I think if one of the biggest things is like questioning and So often the questioning is scary because there comes a lot of risk and sacrifice with the questioning. There is the ups and downs. There's ups and downs no matter what though in life. At least it's the ones that you're like participating in though. And so even when this is happening right now, it doesn't feel like a thing like, oh, this is happening to me. It's like you've made all these choices. Is there a way that you could have recognized this maybe earlier? What would that look like next year? Because I guarantee that the 7 months that takes place in spring, summer, and fall for me is bananas.
Yeah.
And so you're also like, oh, where could you create maybe more space so that you take a little bit more times for inhale, let's say. Or it might just be like, well, this might be the time that you always have to have a deep inhale. It might be more of the extremes. Mm-hmm. Does that work or doesn't that work? But also when we kind of, to come back to that part where I was just more speaking to, which is like, those moments where you have to step into your authentic self and friends and family are like, well, who are you now? Or, I don't recognize you anymore. Or, it's coming up actually in the interview with G. We're kind of jumping ahead, but I
love a good teaser.
Right.
We're way more organized this season. Also, where's my laptop? Oh, we're here. So my laptop went to sleep and then I was like, are we here?
Yeah, can you imagine?
And I authentically shit my pants. No. But inside I was like, how long's it been like this? Because I like forgot
We're
this
trying
was
new
happening.
Things,
I felt like
so
we
we'll
were.
find out how this actually works and if it at all works.
Continue with G.
Well, she changed things up, and I won't go into detail because I don't want to, give too much away. But she completely changed her lifestyle, and that has evolved into changing in many ways as a person, how she perceives the world, how she perceives her own day-to-day life, how she participates in her life. And with that, when she comes home, even though she's able to relate still to family and friends, there's a difference in how they're able to relate with her because they don't know that world. They've never experienced that world that she now lives in. And it does matter. Like I even noticed for myself, I understand the world that I came from because I lived it for the first 20 years of my life. But a lot of my friends and family that are back home or live in that type of those communities or, certain ways of thinking, they can chalk my life and who I am up to some like cliche shit, even to the point of like, oh, you're living so authentically, where I just think that's it's like a pass for them not to question. Mm-hmm. And maybe that's definitely a big judgment or a big, but it feels that way because I didn't question a lot because I was surrounded by an echo chamber. I was surrounded, and we all are to an extent to this day, but definitely. I just mean very much so when you're growing up, right? Everyone's dress is similar.
Right. It's 100% more insular. Actually, it's so funny. The dress is similarly because it's a perfect example that just happened. So I was just meeting up and connected with a friend of mine. She lives on Vancouver Island. But I've known her since grade 6. And I love when there's people that know so much of your history and are still woven into my life. Do we talk all the time? No. When we see each other, does it feel like we left off? Absolutely. Because we went together in high school as well. But I messaged another friend from back home in Ontario being like, oh, I'm going to be seeing our friend Britt tonight. And I was like, hey, remember that time we went for dinner and for some reason all 3 of us were wearing blazers? Because like I was thinking in my head of like the last time we were all together. And then her comment was, she's like, they're back in. I'm wearing one tonight. Is that bad? And I wrote back.
It's not great.
It's not what I said.
It's a Brit. It's not great. I'm going to be honest.
But I said, it's not bad if it feels like you. Yeah. And I said, because even for myself, like, I had to put on a persona for so much of my career as well. And don't get me wrong, like I actually love getting dressed up, but I don't necessarily like getting dressed up in like a Calvin Klein up to the neck, like fight for the right to bear arms type of situation. That was legitimately a thing for a while when I started my career because they thought that women that showed their arms on TV were less credible. Right. But like we're such a hooer. Yeah. Like even just that simple comment of like, is this fine? Which means a woman that's nearing 40, like we're on our latter half of our 30s, is still fitting the molds. kind of thing. Like, it's still that concern of like, will I fit in if? And to an extent, I think we all feel that way sometimes.
Well, look at our moto community. How many people that it's like the black jeans and the black shirt or the this and that, like everyone starts to dress like one another. And that's, I guess, where too we got to keep in mind of like, sometimes I'm like deliberately make sure I'm putting on color, because I'm just like, you are falling into, not that I don't love wearing black. I love all those things. But like, sometimes I'll catch myself being like, oh, you're dressing how you are like, oh, when I'm in my moto state of mind, how do I dress? Versus like, this is what I want to wear today.
I completely went through that. And like, I mean, my glitter helmet's always been me. But like more and more, because I even remember I was like, what's my moto like persona gonna be kind of thing. And at first I went on a tangent. I'm like, I'm gonna buy only brewery t-shirts for some reason. which I just donated.
There's the hard wiring kicking in though too, to a certain extent, because that's that thing of like, what do I need to wear? What do I need to do to make sure that they see me as one of them?
But this past season, I'm like, dream roll. I found this woman on Marketplace, which Marketplace, the algorithm knows me so well, and it advertised me these sequin shorts with tassels that were multicolor, and I was like, yes, nothing has ever felt more like me than to dress like a tricycle.
It was. They're tricycle shorts. Yeah.
Oh, 100%. It's like wearing that tricycle that I also didn't have as a child. Yeah. So like putting it on my body, but it's 100% that like pressure to conform, and that doesn't go away. Like even in every evolution where I feel like I'm getting more in touch and aligning with me, like you constantly have to ask yourself curious questions. Yeah. And a lot of times when I dig deeper and deeper to see where the intent, or like if I'm following a construct, you often still are.
Yeah. 100%. There's no way around. Like, I think that's one of the things that I really want to shine a light on for everybody, is like the human behavior aspect of like this idea that you're going to step so solely into your authentic self, or that there's an end goal, and or there's an avoidant of the feeling of comparison, the feeling of following part of the crowd, or the people that you're surrounding yourself, that you're not going to become closer to what they're like. Is you're setting yourself up for failure. Like I said, we're so hardwired for it that it is going to be a part. Like someone was saying, oh, you got a new tattoo. I said, yeah, and I'll probably have more if I keep hanging out with the folks that I hang out with, because the reality of it is that when you're subjecting your mind and your behavior to, a specific type of group, that it normalizes things for you, and you become more likely. Now, there's also
50% of my tattoos match with my friends. I just realized.
Someone said you were going to get a mosquito tattoo. Tell them they're out of their mind.
Yeah.
It's one of my biggest.
Mine's my ugliest. Like, no offense. I was kind of like, oh, that's hideous. Well, we'll put it over here.
Remember, I was like, where am I going to put a mosquito? Like on the bottom of my foot? Nope, just as huge as I found a spot for on the back of my arm. And so from far away, it looks like a cross. So blessed be. Yeah. So really what I was hoping to put on my body was a religious cross. But that idea that you're going to get away from it. And so I think one of the things that is more realistic to do.
Right? So I just like, it's just funny. Like, not even just that, but like, everything we're saying so true.
It's so true. It's so true. And it's like, and at the end of the day, it's laughably true.
Yes.
And that's also the thing about it, is like, you have to also recognize the like silliness of how we're built as a species, right? And where you're like, what am I working with, and what can I leverage about that to like, how do I? And I think that's where they talk so much more about like alignment of like, how do you a lot, or how do you listen more to kind of that like that piece of your soul, piece of that like I can't say inner dialogue, because the inner dialogue comes from the brain and mind, right? Don't listen to that.
Mine
ever.
Sometimes is like, you suck, you fail. Why are you doing this?
I was like, that is not. And I know that can sound very like woo-woo, but there's not. I think anyone that you're quiet enough with yourself, your soul and spirit's kind of always there speaking to you, and the energy of things, right? But I think my I think my point is that the more that you're in a state of like questioning, and the more that you are surrounding yourself with like different opinions and different viewpoints, and not just thinking that because this one feels right, if you will, because again, there's all this human behavior that's working with you or sometimes against you, that you have to be in a constant state of like questioning and trying on new things, going closer to one thing, bopping around a little bit within that. Obviously, if it really resonates and stuff, yeah, if that's a breadcrumb, follow that breadcrumb, and you're going to get more closer to a life that resonates with you or brings you more well-being, or the word that we like to use is expansion. Word for 2024, I bet.
Predicted it. You heard it here first.
Kids. Expansion. But it's that having the idea that like you're not on the right kind of journey with it all because you're still comparing, or because you're still falling into, or being like, I'm completely authentic because I wear black now and leather and ride a motorcycle, is like, well, no. The reason why you're more likely to wear those things than you didn't before is because of the people that you're surrounding yourself, and the brain loves patterns, and it starts to align itself with all those things, and blah, blah, blah. Doesn't mean you don't still like those. Maybe, yeah, that is, you're like, that does, and I wore color only because my, the family I grew up in, whatever.
Yeah, was but like, Chelsea, the amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat.
Yeah, like
it's
I just think if you're falling into those little...
An ochre and peach.
And just because my family only wore glitter and sparkle doesn't mean I have to. That would be your child, what we raised in.
Yeah, what's funny is like my mom loved sparkle and glitter. So of course I absolutely didn't. Like I was just like, fuck you, sparkles.
That was wiring waiting to pop up later in life.
Right? But like then it's like I always really loved it. But because she loved it, I was like, no.
Right.
Not for me.
And
then eventually I circled back and I was like, it is great. So like we're actually... I
see you, Mom.
I have purchased a glitter black wallpaper for behind my bed. And I'm just lucky enough to have a husband that's like, giver.
Yeah, right. Lean in hard. Be your authentic self.
One of the things I loved, you sent me a podcast yesterday, which admittedly, as soon as she got in today, I'm like, I made it through 20 minutes. And it wasn't because the podcast wasn't good. It's because
She's lazy.
I had wrote her before and I was like, yeah, I'm at the gym. Like, I'm going to listen to it on my cardio. And the person was the male version of like, hello, like just this really soothing voice.
Oh, yeah.
And I was like, we're not working up a sweat.
He's a psychologist that like, he talks like this.
Right?
Yeah.
I was like, I can understand where and when this would be the listen, but I'm glad that I made it through that first intro chunk because it did actually speak to me, explaining as well how our authenticity can operate in a range, like how we kind of spoke to there, that obviously no matter what, there are certain constructs, there are certain influences from our environment that are going to dictate how sometimes we need to show. And like one of the examples and what was the name of the podcast again? Just because I'm going to quote from it.
Being well. Yeah.
So one of the things that they used as an example was like, if you're driving along and then someone cuts you off and you kind of like the two versions inside authentically, you want to be like, fuck you. Because maybe that's how you're feeling that day.
I stayed authentic to myself for a very long time. Turns out wasn't the best for my well-being.
Well, and that's exactly it, where it was kind of like, but in that moment, almost like mentally editing yourself, where you're not going to show up in that way because of the environment, or like in your workplace, I don't know, maybe the authentic you is you solely love walking around naked, but that would be an HR violation kind of thing. You have to be able to pivot yourself into your environment. And it spoke to me so much because if you've listened to us for a while, I think that my authenticity was definitely something that I struggled with because, and it was more like that spiritual nudge and intuition where I was like, something doesn't quite fit. And I'm like, me as a performer, I've always loved performance kind of thing. And the route that I had taken was offering so much of that. But all of a sudden I was like, why now does this just feel like it doesn't match within myself? And what do I do with this information? And obviously I ultimately ended up parting ways with that. And I didn't have a realization until lately as to what felt, there were a lot of things within the corporate structure that I didn't love, But I was like, it was my exposure to negative energy, I think, that ultimately was not hitting the mark for me. And I realized that I had a choice.
Yeah.
And I had a choice whether I wanted to show up in this space or not. And I also was very conscientious that what I was a part of putting out was directly contributing to other people's poor mental health in a large degree. What gave me that hint extra that I needed to make a change was actually starting this. Because as soon as you and I started, I was like, holy shit. Like, if I had to think of a space that feels most like me, it has been this. And it's because of exactly what you talked about in the beginning, like the vulnerability. And I mean, we prep to an extent for an episode, but it's not like we're prepping so much that we're even editing ourselves as it's coming out. It is a very organic format.
Yeah.
It's the bond between you and I that formed where we can play off of each other. And I think like that listening, and I know this is something when we have G on that she speaks to so eloquently as well. It's like this deep listening that we really do need to take those exhale moments so that we can allow that to come in. Because I have a feeling, and I know it when I audit how my behavior was, or like cynicism or certain actions that I took or what I journaled, which really does allow me to do that self-audit. The signs were there for a long time that things weren't necessarily right, but I wasn't attuned to it until it was actually making me sick. And I don't mean I didn't have a physical ailment, luckily, but like, yeah, I think it's like taking those moments to be more attuned, and then it's constantly making adjustments. Because even doing that, I've realized, I think I was naive in my head, being like, one quick switch and problem solved. And you're like, no, it's a constant dial.
About the quick switch, because that one is one that I used to completely fall prey to, and I watch it happen often. Is in there's you know that they just got to figure it out on their own at the end of the day. But this whole thing of like, I've read this and I listened to this and I've stepped into it and here I am, and I'm like, you just bypassed all the actual work that takes you to the actual space where you're living more. It's like you've just put on a different mask. You've just switched the on the spectrum of like going from one version of yourself to a different version of like an extrovert to an introvert, or introvert to an extrovert, and you're just like, now I'm that sort of thing. And like I'm like, well, no, that's just a different mask.
Well, that's like the saying, I'm stepping into my authentic self. Here I am.
And like, go fuck you, and go fuck you if you don't like it. And you're like, that's not authentic. That's not at all. You're just now, stubborn rather than passive, or whatever it looks like, right? And you still don't feel grounded in self. Because that's also, I can't remember what the definition was. It was somewhere in here, but it was like, the like allowing different viewpoints, allowing, kind of thing. And again, I say, I used to really think, I still fall into those moments without a doubt. Like, it's not like, again, you're here and no longer here, in that space. But like, I also think that's where like the declaration of it is like, I'm going to do this self-work and I'm going to become, more authentically me. And you're like, that's awesome. But I think what happens is then people declare it, and they declare it, and they declare it, and they get all this like positive feedback around it, and they feel like they've done the work because they declared it and they've gotten the positive feedback. You see it online all the time, and it's one of those things. But then anything that gets like questioned about it, or anything that people there's an immediate wall, and there's immediate like the go fuck you, or like, I'm no longer going, and you're like, that's not centeredness. And I get that you're still finding your way, or I'm still finding my way, and I've done all of this. I still have moments of this without a doubt. We want to so often bypass the tough, uncomfortable, sometimes long work that comes into it. And again, we never arrive fully there. And so, but it feels really good. And that's also really, when you think about it, the most unauthentic thing is because the reason you're trying to step into this authenticity is because it's a new fad. It's the word of 2023. And so you want to be a part of that. And so, but that's just more of the belonging.
Yep.
Because if you were doing the work that gets you closer to that, You would feel obviously better. You would feel all those great things, and that's awesome. But you'd also have really fucked up days because if you are stepping further into that, you're going against so much neural wiring and behavioral patterns and all those things. And everything inside of your body and brain are wanting to do those things. So if you are going against them, you are going to be the most uncomfortable because you're breaking patterns, recreating, and you're going against your like the human experience or your human wiring. So that's the kind of thing where I see often. And again, way back when I did all the things that felt good and that I was like, here I am. But then I would still be, in conflict, if you will, with myself and with the outside world. And then it was just like, oh, well, it's their fault, or they're the ones. And it was like, well, no, you're swinging the pendulum to the other side. You're trying to bypass all those different things. And the only other thing I'd say on that too, as well, is like a lot of times too, the whole like declaration and the live out loud about it is that one of the things that society really values more than the other is like extroverts over introverts. I find it often in a certain capacity with families that I work with the kids. They're like, they need to be more like this. How do I get them to be more like this? Because they'll be more introverted. And it's like, how they are is beautiful and is exactly them. Because they're not living out loud doesn't mean that they're not living well. Now, it's the same thing of like, if you're an introvert, but you would like to have more of a voice in certain environments or certain capacities or relationships, but you don't feel confident enough or secure enough or any of those things to utilize that voice, that's you not feeling like you can be authentically yourself, right? Or you're just more passive because that just worked, that ended up being generated because of that introversion kind of thing throughout your childhood and later in life. But that's no different than the extrovert does all these people-pleasing things, and their personality is so deliberate so that they make the world comfortable and all. It's no more healthier. Yep. But because that person is living, they're so authentic. They're so authentic, and it's one of those things that you're like, well, I watch a lot of people do those things and know from their, like, what they say is like, none of this feels like me. Yeah. But the world says, look at how authentic you are because, gosh, you're putting yourself out there for judgment. You're putting yourself on display, and that's got to be hard.
And there's instant feedback too, that when you talk about like the sounding board and the echo chamber, it's never been more on offer.
Yes. Yes. We're like an introvert. How often do they get that feedback? Though I think to a certain extent, if it's like, oh, I always feel calm around you, or you've got such a calming presence, or whatever it is, when they're, I think that there is, but I guess I find it important to acknowledge because it's come up so often in my work that I'm constantly having to advocate for the more introverted young person, that like they bring so much value, and asking them to live out loud more often is asking them to go against who they intrinsically are or want to be or feel compelled or called to be.
This happened in my sibling dynamic exponentially because my sister is an extreme introvert. And we were just rewatching home movies the last time I was back in Halifax in February. It was really lovely. But there were so many comments made even on the video because my sister's so camera shy, and it would be like, why can't you go join Chrissy over there? And of course I'm a like fucking idiot that's like da-da-da-da, oh, there's the camera, like just anything I could do to have the moment and have the attention. And it actually made me feel sad because I was getting a viewpoint or a lens into her experience growing up, because really, the underlying tone of it was like, what's wrong with you? Why can't you go be like that?
100%.
And I even said to her, too, I was like, oh, like, fuck, dude.
Like, welcome to my world, bitch.
Yeah, honestly. And you know, it's funny because we have a close relationship that doesn't talk a lot.
Yeah.
It just is what it is. But, you know, I think there were some dynamics even with that sometimes where she'd be like, you know, there was a word once where she was like, Chrissy just shits out golden horseshoes kind of thing.
Mm.
But it must have felt so much like that because I was so in your face.
Yeah.
And I've always been like that since I was a little kid. And then when I saw that experience, and that's exactly what she was taught, you should be more like this.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, I know this person and they have so many insanely valuable qualities.
Yes. Oh, everybody has these incredible things to bring to the table.
And to be honest, I think it's like even more beautiful because of how humble it is because of her introvert personality.
Yeah. Yeah.
Whereas, you know, I can look very much like I'm solely driven by ego. Absolutely. There's a lot. I mean, let's face it. I'm in a career path where I'm putting myself in front of people's faces to a degree. You won't ever do that without ego. But because of that, it's like a constant dance with it as well.
Well, you and I are both in that arena in its own right, where I think ultimately we're looking towards like, how does this serve community? But you like the human behavior aspect, you can't not be in those arenas and it not affect you having to constantly be aware of ego and how it affects you on a day-to-day and how certain positive reinforcement, you know, that the habitual behavior wants to chase it or get more of it or all those different things, you know, kind of thing, and have to constantly be in conversation with self.
Yeah. And even like evaluating your value. Like for me, that's 100% something that I struggle with greatly because if you like positive reinforcement, I'm like, ooh, lay it on me.
Right. Oh yeah. And you were like, cause you were really like studious and like you were the one that was achieving, right, in school and stuff like that, right? So your early days too were completely revolved
give me the gold
around,
stickers, like all of that. And so it's like really acknowledging that it fucked me up in my adult life for sure.
It does.
Because any time periods where like you realize that dose of reality that life doesn't really work that way.
Yeah.
And it does then your ego and your brain starts feeding the question of like, am I good enough? Da, da, da. And if I'm not achieving X, it's why I've been so susceptible to burnout so many times too, because I'm like, oh, I need to do more. I got to prove myself more. I can show you what I do more. And eventually, obviously, we know that just exhausts the human being. But then at what point too is that more just not yourself?
Yeah.
As well, right? So it's just like a constant. I'm so much more aware, like even the work I think that came out of COVID, like as much as I still had a job. So, and trust me, I'm grateful because I know so many of you listening probably went through such financial scare during that time. And I just want to like acknowledge I can't even imagine what that lived experience was. But for me, it's really where a lot of the work, it was like this next level of work. I knew a lot of stuff. Like, again, I know it's buzzy, but it's like, oh, I've had a journal since like before everyone had a journal kind of thing. And I'm not being like, I had a journal because of that. It was just like part of the foundations of who I was. And I had really deep philosophical conversations with my dad growing up kind of thing. And if I showed you my grandmother's scrapbook, which is one of the most valuable things I own, it alludes to a lot of the values and belief systems that you and I have. But I think when you get in the distractions of life, it's so easy to forget a lot of it. And it's also very easy to avoid the work because circling back here, the work is really fucking messy. Like I would say this year has been one of my most raw years in recent memory. It was like opening up, and I still am, so many different doors of myself. And as I've learned through therapy, it's because there's been these safer places to unlock those.
Yeah.
But even when you start, like even with that, it would have been easy for me to be like, I'm stepping into my vulnerability and like now I am healed because it's moved through. No, like I had, as we know where I left you off, it's like I had a panic attack at the end of August. I had a very profound, like cathartic, energetic, I don't even know. Honestly, I feel like I had such a release at that summit. It was one of the most insane, like I actually felt a body of energy leave like a ball of energy leave my body. Like when I was lying
I would
down
like
on that grass,
to leave my body immediately.
right? It was like,
I was like, this tired ball that's like feels like a
Yeah.
90-pound weight. I'm like, I look forward to when and it sounds like silly when you're like, oh, I'll wake up and but like it does sometimes where you're like, today feels different.
but
you
then
have
I was
you had an
like, the
actual
work
moment.
has to fucking
Follow.
on the other side of that. That's when I hit the brakes, because I was like,
Yes.
if I need to, something is happening. And like, if I'm going to do this right, I need to do things different.
Yes.
Because if I do it as I've
You'll
always
be right
done,
back there.
100%.
Yeah, you'll be right back there.
And I'm still like, right now, I feel, you know, when you have your equilibrium a little bit and you are, you know, feeling a little bit more connected to flow and all of that, it's a great feeling, and it's a welcome feeling after going on the dip for sure. But even still, I'm like, if I don't keep doing this work that I've started to unlock, then you're just going to regress back where you did. And then what will happen if I start doing that? I won't be showing up as myself. Because what was happening for really my whole life, I've had a wall and a mask on. Which truthfully, like, that's what kind of started this whole thing, because I was like,
most of us do, until like that's why midlife crisis
Definitely.
even happens, because everyone's just like, what the fuck am I doing? What have I, you know, that, because even if you're getting outside of the boxes that, you know, to tick, like you and I very much have tried to do that as much as possible in our lives. But like, you do have these, when you start to kind of like unravel things, question things, it's like one question answered a lot of times opens up, you know, 9 more questions. And you're like, oh shit, oh shit, oh shit. And it's a process, the messy process.
but it's so worth it, because on the other side of that, like, even in this instance, I felt, and you and I have talked about this, where I was like, I feel like I don't necessarily at the time, and I mean, I'm still working through it, authentically show up in my relationships, to the point that I was like, if, as I said before, I'm somebody that people would come to a lot and share their things, and I would be there, and I would say that I know what to say. And I do think like being a deep listener is a skill of mine.
Yes.
And like, I will,
It is.
like, I'm just like, have grown into really celebrating that about myself, and I'm grateful that's a quality that I have.
It's without a doubt a strength.
However, I wouldn't innately feel what one was supposed to feel from an empathetic side of
Right.
things. And I started to really dislike that quality in myself, because as much as anyone I was interacting with wouldn't know that, because I've got a wall and a face, like inside I was kind of like, what is that? And unless I think empathy is like such a tremendous it's like a huge part of the human experience, and I'm like,
It's sitting
mine
in a pain
is
with them.
muted. Mine is muted.
Yeah.
I like have such a wall of protection up there that like I'm here with you, but I'm not in it with you.
Yes.
And there is a very profound difference. And that made me
Yes.
feel very disingenuine to a degree. I don't think like, I mean, I hope, like, I love my friends, and I don't think it was like impacting my relationships necessarily like in an extreme way on the other side.
I don't think it ever, like, when, no matter who you are, I don't think it necessarily, well, depend, like I'm talking about, you still held space. I think you always held space, but so it's going to be a positive experience for that. So it's not necessarily that it impacts a relationship, but if you are holding back, no matter who you are, what happens is that it affects the deepness
1000%.
and the effect that it can have on both parties, that how deeply you can go to that space with one another, and how deeply that person feels seen and not alone in their pain. And so it's not that it impacts it in a way that it takes away from, but you rob yourself, and as well as the relationship, of being able to go to a deeper space. It's like anything, like growth.
Yep.
You know, like you can only take yourself as far as you're willing to go, and it doesn't necessarily mean that you don't still have beautiful things in your life and in your world. But the more that you're willing to dive into your authenticity in this life, the deeper that experience will be for it. You know, it's like, it's not as much as like learning more as it's like learning deeper.
Yes.
And you live deeper, and you feel deeper, and you experience deeper, you know, like kind of like what grief was and the death and dying around the last how many years. It was like, it didn't necessarily, like I lived and learned deeper of a lot of what I already knew, but it was like on a deeper level that just like then opened a different realm up.
Exactly.
Of this life.
And that was like just as messy a process.
Yeah.
I mean, anyone that's had to go through the grieving process knows how
Hot mess
it's
express.
not linear at all.
Hot mess express.
Yeah. It's like there's no, it's like a big ball and a swirl. And I think that any facet of ourselves that we're looking to unlock in that way to gain more alignment, but again, like even just getting beyond that deeper buzzword and what it means, like none of it is going to be straightforward. And maybe it's frustrating because motivation podcast after motivation podcast, you realize that like whether it's getting out of your comfort zone or embracing change or trying to connect more to who you are as a person and what does that even mean, is that a thing, all of it, none of those are easy things. But if I were to look back at this year and I cried a lot, which was new. And I went through so many moments of that twisted stomach. Like I had sleepless nights, like so many things that felt very out of character for how I had lived my life, which just made it, you start being like, what the hell is wrong with me? And will this ever end?
Yeah. The will this ever end is a tough one. Yes.
But it's like, has it been worth it? Absolutely.
Oh, God, yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Like I wouldn't, and who the hell knows what the next year has in store? I mean, between you and I, there's been enough plot twists over the last couple of years, and that's just life. That is just life. But I'm like, it is so worth it to actually unravel and do the dig, because I could not imagine. And I think this is where a lot of, I was just saying this the other day, maybe it was to you, I can't remember whom else, but when I look at, I was to you because I used the word boomer and I was like, bless their hearts, because I know it's like become a bad word. But for that generation, I see so many people that really didn't grow up in environments that allowed themselves to ask those questions. They never thought to ask those questions. And I actually do see it coming up in people that I have relationships with of that age. And I
think it's because of our generation, though, in a big way, because they watch us asking the questions. I know that like that's been my experience anyways, is like unapologetically asking the questions and them kind of being like, why is that important? That doesn't matter. And you're like, oh, it absolutely matters. And here's why. And here's how it's changed my life. And then it's like, oh.
Well, and that's what I like about Gen Z, because they're coming to it even sooner. Because as much as like social, I couldn't imagine like for so many of them growing up with social media basically from the get-go.
Nightmare.
But at the same time, there's such a narrative on there too, where I know they look at us being like, you idiots. Like, why didn't you ask any of these sooner? And you're like, absolutely. But it's like, thank God it's now.
Yeah.
Because to me, I'm just kind of like, it's now I see more opportunity to live deeper and fuller and challenge myself in different ways and probably fuck things up in other ways, but also knowing that that's all wonderfully okay. And the episode that we do have coming up after off-road, because those are always fun. But with G, I mean, she's kind of the perfect segue after this conversation, because truly somebody that has asked themselves the questions many times and maybe was a little bit slower in the beginning to make those shifts. Yeah. And now, like, the more you do it, the faster you generally move through it. Or the more you do it, the deeper you move through it, and it might take a little bit longer, but it's like you have this knowing that it's going to be okay on the other side.
Yeah. Skirch. That's my brake noise. If you're watching this, you'll notice we're wearing different clothes, have less makeup on. And it's because we're recording this part on a different day. And why? Because when I was editing, I was like, oh, we talked a lot about what authenticity isn't, or where we get a little like, muffled or whatever. And then I always said, Chrissy, we should probably mention more of also what it is. So,
we circled back, so to speak.
We circled back. Here we
go.
So, we're going to name some. I think I got 12 here. The computer helped me. I went on the line. Got some advice from on the line. First off, know your values. Figure out what really matters to you and pin down those core values that guide your decisions. It's like having your personal compass for staying true to yourself.
This one is one we talk about a lot, can be a big struggle sometimes,
Tell
but it's
me
worth
more.
it. Expressing your true feelings. Sometimes easier said than done, but you shouldn't be afraid to just let it all out there, share how you're feeling, and that includes not just the highlight reel. Because I
Yeah.
feel like oftentimes that's our default. We always want to talk about what's going well. Getting really real and clear with people that you love and yourself about the lows too.
Yeah, I did that at the start of the episode.
Yes, you did.
Also, this is 2 weeks later. I'm doing real well. Spoiler alert. True story. Went insular. A lot of yoga. A lot of just like chilling the fuck out. Baths. Right. I'm doing good.
This is the baths. I
Started-
10 out of 10 recommend. They heal a lot.
Started this episode. Not so much. I was a bit, testy. All right. Setting boundaries. Oh, this is a really good one, especially for us as women, because we get taught very, very young that you're just yes, and your job is to care and comfort and all the things. But like draw some lines in the sand about what works for you and let people know what your limits are and stick to them. It's creating your own space, and it's also teaching people how to treat you, how you want to be treated. So that's a big one, is like, be okay saying no. Set boundaries. Know what they actually are as well. People set them all the time, and they actually, you're just like, well, no, you're just creating barriers.
Yes. Well, and I think setting boundaries and being really clear with the people that you're setting them with as well. Because it's
Yeah.
one thing to be like, oh, I've set a boundary, but if you actually aren't explicitly clear with that person, you might cause a lot of hurt on both sides too.
Yeah.
So that's a big one. On that note, embracing vulnerability. Is it done on purpose that I read this one?
You do mention this in this episode as well.
I do. You know, being vulnerable, it sucks. No, it's completely worth it and amazing, but it's really about saying, this is me, imperfections and all.
There's a reason it takes courage, because it's that you don't know what's going to happen on the other side of it, and you're showing your most authentic self and your raw self. And so it's like, well, if that gets rejected or discarded, whoa, that's going to hurt. But here's the thing that's really cool about that in the bigger picture. Even if it does, they're not your people. And so if they discard you at your vulnerability, or if they decide that you know, like what you're showing them isn't for them, that's good. They're not for you either.
Yes.
And so it does favors in the bigger picture, is like, but it does take courage, because you are taking the chance of it not going the way that you hope. But ultimately, in the bigger picture, if it continues on that route, it was never for you to begin with.
Exactly.
Make mindful decisions. This is a big one for me. Think twice before making decisions. Ask yourself if they match up with those values and what you want. It's like steering your bike in the actual direction that you're headed. This is a really big one, a day to day, because I had this idea of what I wanted out of life, or who I wanted to, you know, develop into, and all those different things. But like my daily choices actually didn't map up or align with that at all. It was just really a hope and a prayer. And then I was constantly like, well, why am I here again this following year?
You're like, plot twist.
What?
I've ended up in the same
Ow.
place.
I don't think the manifestation gods heard me. I said, and it's like, well, you got to do the human work too, you dipshit. And so slowing down and becoming really present in my day happened even this morning. Like I said, going insular, just really slowing things down. And I was going to go for a big walk, and then Dave had to get some Christmas presents, and I was just going to come along for the route and blah, blah, blah. And I was like, no. I'm just going to chill. And I did the yoga and a bath.
See those baths.
Those baths. That's what I did this morning. And I felt so good. And the sun was coming in. I was just like, slow down. But it was always like mindful of not just like, yeah, why not? I'll do that thing that day. And it was like, well, what's my goal right now? Okay, well then what would today look like to move towards that goal? And so that is a game changer.
Well, and leveraging off of that, being present and living in the present moment. Being where you are, not where you think you should be. Honestly, if you're not, it's the biggest recipe. Well, if you're not being present, you're either living in the future or behind you. And I get this one's easier said than done. And I know we've given motivation maintenances around this before, but like one thing that I always love, I've got a dog, is like practicing being present on my walks. I will quite literally be like, look at the tree. Do I see the buds? Is there a leaf there? Like getting that granular about it when you need to kind of just ground yourself back into the present moment.
Be true to your passions or curious about potential interests. Do stuff that genuinely fires you up and energizes you or stretches you outside of your comfort zone, and chase after your passions because they're a big part of who you are. It's like letting your freak flag fly in the things that you love and help explore yourself. And also, it's one of those things, don't let the, gender normative things hold you back from trying something new. Like I went into martial arts and motorcycles and all these different things that I grew up being very much like, that's what, male gender does. And so it was always one of those things that I pushed back because I was interested in. And it was like, well, no, why can't I? And I fell in love with most of those things. And anything, like, it's just, don't, if you have an interest in it, go check it out, go see what's that. And if it really lights you up, go deeper into that.
And often this kind of bridges off it as well. But I find when you pursue those things, you tend to connect with people that light something up inside of you as well, because you're vibing on such a level. So the next one is kind of surround yourself with authenticity, which again, I get this word seems like it's used so much, but it's the people that you can open up and be vulnerable with that will take you at face value, and you can provide that same space for them. There's such a difference that can happen when you surround yourself with that. Like, again, we always go back to our personal stories, but for me, in like unlocking different levels of vulnerability, from the words of my therapist, it didn't happen until I surrounded myself in a space that felt safe enough to do so. And it was like through these relationships and people. So there is so much value in finding that.
And also, just know that this is a bit where like sometimes that sacrifice comes in, because the more that you surround yourself with people that you feel you resonate with or are really truly kind of digging into the stuff within themselves and living more authentically, sometimes it can really shine a light on the relationships in your life that aren't bringing that and no longer are maybe the healthiest for you or bringing anything to the table. And so it's not to say, just like peace out with them, but just know that it's going to slightly potentially also change how you might relate to other people in your life, and that's just part of the process too. But it's not the most fun.
No,
that's why
definitely.
Too, people also are like, well, that's not,
I'll just live on the surface.
Or like, I'll just pretend I keep liking this so I can be around these people, sort of thing. Just know that like ultimately, if they're meant to be in your life in one capacity or another, they will. But that this is part of the uncomfortable change that comes along with digging deeper into finding out what makes you tick. Learn from your mistakes. So don't beat yourself up over mistakes. That's the kind of authentic thing of like, well, if it didn't work out beautifully, it wasn't my authentic self, because my authentic self is just supposed to happen gloriously, peacefully, and like with like flaming lights, colors, not sure.
All the things.
That's not how that works. You will fumble, bumble, and fail your way a lot of times. There'll be a lot of feel-good moments, without a doubt. But like I said earlier in the episode, is like you're going against a lot of your conditioning and your habitual behaviors and all the things. And so like, and also if you're trying something new and diving into the things that you find passion around, mistakes are, like I said, inevitable. Don't beat yourself up. Take them as lessons and move forward. It's like saying, okay, it didn't work out. What can I learn from it? And also sometimes that's like a really cool experience to recognize, I am doing things differently. That failure means I am doing things differently.
Yes, that's a huge one.
Yeah. And it's just like, oh, that's actually a great sign. It doesn't feel so good, but it's actually a great sign in the big scheme of things.
Self-reflection is another one. And I know that a lot of our motivation maintenance that we're going to be getting to shortly leads back to this one, but I can't say enough how important it is to do those like audits and check-ins with ourselves, because at the end of the day, we are habitual creatures. Most of us do have patterns that we follow, and especially when you start to challenge that more within yourself, it's important to get so curious. And when you do reflect, this is like one big takeaway as I go through it. There's moments that I reflect on myself where you might go and have like a bit of a gross feeling over like something you said or how you behaved or how you showed up. Just remember, like sometimes we attach shame to that, whereas you can do a lot of reframing in those moments to like analyze maybe where the mistake was or where a course could be corrected, but knowing if you're feeling that feeling inside that you've grown. Like if you're looking back, you know what I mean? Yeah. Like that there's actually been growth there. And so that is why self-reflection is so important.
And I rambled like a bit, honest. Like, I really don't think we're honest with ourselves enough. We were so scared to go to the most like uncomfortable parts of ourselves, but like that's where your biggest aha moments are is like the shadow self. Be honest with yourself of like, what am I self-sabotaging and where am I creating barriers constantly that I keep ending up here? Because we play such a blame game of like, well, I'm here because of that person, or this happened to me because of that person, or I'm only because of that person. Yes, there's conversations to be had. Yes, there's things that you need to figure out. But like ultimately, if you keep on having a pattern in your life, or you're not where you want to be, or you're feeling as though like, gosh, I want to be closer to that authenticity of like how, well, what are you doing on a day to day? And actually one of the exercises that I remember hearing about that I think would be a super helpful one, if you feel like I really don't know, like no matter how honest with like myself, ask like two people that you are really close with, that you have like a very trusting bond with, that are your cheerleaders, and go to them and ask them, for my like best self, can you please be honest with me about where some of my blind spots are? And this will help if you're really those people, if they love you and if they are your friends, they will tell you with love and empathy, but they would tell you, but get honest with yourself in the self-reflection, because we can't go really anywhere if we're not really looking at where we're starting.
Yep.
Because then we're just like making a roadmap to like the starting point's completely off.
Well, and then at the same time, it's exactly as you say, we know life's going to teach you the same lessons over and over again. So if you find that you keep saying like, why am I here? Or how did I get back here? Or why does this keep happening to me? There's probably a little bit under the hood that needs to be examined, and your answer's probably going to lie there.
Yeah. All right, last one. Celebrate your achievements, the little ones. We do those big things. I don't remember what it's called, but like we talked about the like where you have this idea that you only get to really celebrate the big giant goals, and then half the time we're like, oh, that was all that was. But it's like where you really should be celebrating is all the small things, because the small things are what actually get you to the big goals. And so giving yourself real credit for like the really tough things that are usually the small things, whether that's saying like, you know, I sat down with the uncomfortable feeling and I sat in it instead of like shopping or going out or doing whatever it is, right? Or it's the thing of like, I sat down and I did my work or sent out that email that was going to work towards this goal that I have with whatever it is. What's the small moments that you can give yourself that credibility of like, I've done this? Because when you recognize what you're doing for yourself in a genuine way, that's reinforcing the following the breadcrumbs essentially into like that version of yourself that feels most like yourself.
And that takes us through our steps of actually getting clear on how to be your most authentic self. We now return to our regular scheduled programming of the first time we've recorded this thing, because we ended it off in banging fashion.
Back to our original outfits and however our voices sound in the first recording.
Da-la-la-la.
Doodly-doo, doodly-doo, doodly-doo.
Well, on that note, I think that leads us to sparkle.
Motivation
Maintenance. Motivation.
I didn't think of my motivation maintenance today. I kind of
well,
forgot.
I can jump in.
Yeah.
So, and I know that so many of these, you're like, you guys have shared this one before, but
You're going to journal?
No, obviously. That actually was a really helpful tool through this thing.
She's like, but seriously, journal.
Yeah, seriously, journal. But obviously, meditation is something that we talk about a lot. And I've said before how I really struggle, truthfully. I know there was somebody that I interviewed last year that said the best thing, how meditation needs a rebrand, because so many people think it's just silencing, where we know it's zooming out, allowing thoughts to float by, being the observer in your life. But again, when you're in the thick of it, the last thing you want to do is kind of slow down and do that. So a tool, if you are like this and you're also having trouble, I actually found a couple like EDM types, but they're like a meditation, but like in slightly intense beats.
Yes, I've heard of these. There's like brown noise or something like that. It's like one of the most calming, and they're like EDM ones.
I gotta see. I didn't know this, but I do know there's like one artist, Inzo, INZO. And truthfully, like when my brain was just kind of like fighting all the thoughts and it's like time to go to bed. And I'm someone who has never, ever suffered from insomnia. Like I don't know why. I've always been a tremendous sleeper, never had these things of waking up in the night with a thought in my whole life. And so this was a very new experience as it was happening. And it was just kind of like, don't feel bad if you have to pivot the tool, I guess is my point. For those 5 minutes, I actually was doing my inhale, you know?
Yeah.
And it was when I was struggling the most, because that's the thing. When you're in it, all your tools and all the things we talk about actually get way harder to execute.
Yeah.
You don't want to look at the journal. You're like, fuck you, journal.
Yeah.
Like all the things. So it's like never been more important to find ways to kind of pivot and make it work for you.
That's a good one. Mine would probably be is taking a little bit of an audit in your day or your week, because I know days can look a little different. Pay attention to how often you're in a conversation and you're going like, right, yeah, the agreeable conversation where like you don't actually agree with what they're saying, you don't actually resonate with what they're saying, you don't actually want to be saying, yeah, oh right, yes, right. I hear it and see it all the time where I know a person and I'm like, I know that's not, why are you saying yes and this? But it's this like this, and it's like, oh, that's just conversational. But it's one of those things where you're participating in the kind of like this like fake dialogue sort of thing.
This is such a good one, because I even think of like an exchange that we had just the other night. And this is exactly it, where conversation should be an exchange when we were talking about comedy. And you had really valid points about comedians and how obviously a lot of them toe the line. You're like, at what point at the end of the day is it just hate speech? And I've gone and seen like a bunch of offside comedies, And so I was kind of like, I see your point 100%.
Yeah.
And like, especially with who you were particularly talking about, I'm like, yeah, like that's just an out there asshole. Yeah. But it's like one of those moments where it could have been easy to sit there and be like, oh yes, absolutely. Where I'm like, I hear you and 100% there's valid points, but I can't genuinely agree wholeheartedly because I also participate in exactly the thing that you're speaking to.
Mm-hmm.
And so we just, I mean, there was no confrontation. It was a conversation kind of thing. And like, that's such a tiny example of showing up in those ways, because it would have been very easy to be like, absolutely, where I'm like, fair. I see this viewpoint 100%. Right. But at the same time, I'm like, there's also like a space where I don't think comedy should be censored and
Which
and it like created a whole conversation
agree with that as well.
Right. But like,
this is
that's a prime example where there's like two different viewpoints where it would be very easy to be like, am I going to get shamed if I say where I stand or how I behave in this world?
Right. Yes, that's a perfect example, because it's one of those things where you go like, sure, and you're like, well, I don't want to cause a thing, and you're like, but it doesn't have to be a thing. And part of the reason why it becomes a thing a lot of times is because it's already decided that one is right or one is wrong, or you don't want to be the one that even there's a chance that person will look at you and you're like, they might look at you and judge you. But it's one of those things where it's also like,
at least they're judging you
and you're like,
and not a version of you that isn't you.
Yeah. And because I just watch all these really, and I participated in my own way to some extent, without a doubt. Like, I'm not immune to any of these things, but I think one of the biggest things is I really ask myself often of like, say what you think, mean what you say. And sometimes, on reflection, I'll be like, you didn't really need to say it, or you could have said it a little different, or whatever it looks like. But I would rather be doing it in a way that I'm reflecting on what I could do a little bit differently in how I said it, or what I said, or the timing I said it, versus feeling as though I'm never saying what I actually think and feel. Because it's one thing to be like, you say what's on your mind, but you're just being an asshole. Or you say what's on your mind, but you're just like, you're in a bad mood, so you're going to make it. That's why I say I shouldn't be around people right now. Because
I can't wait till she leaves my house.
Right? Because my
energy ends up all fucked up all day.
Be a little like,
blame you.
Yeah. Wait to see who you run into today. And so it's one of those things where it's just like an awareness of the lens in which you're looking through. But anyone that knows me knows that like I am quite honest with what I think and feel, and I am willing to be the bad guy, or willing to be off-putting at times, or willing to them to say like,
it's one of my favorite qualities about you, actually.
But it's like, and too, if you ask my opinion, you're going to get what I think. I'm not going to give you the version that makes you most comfortable. I'm going to give you the version that I see from my perspective. Doesn't make it right, and it doesn't make it wrong, and it doesn't mean that you have to take it and do anything with it. I'm terrible at it, at not giving unsolicited advice. I'm terrible because I almost always do. Because I also find that, like, I'm not being part of your echo chamber.
Totally.
When people are just like, well, this and this and this. I'm like, well, have you looked at it from this angle? And they're like, that's not what I'm talking about. And I'm like, well, I can't sit here and listen to this when there's not another, like, I cannot do, because I feel like that's, and this is where I get caught up a bit, and I'm getting a little offside here, a little on my branch topic. But one of the reasons I guess I say it does bother me how agreeable everybody is to what, and everyone just jumps on the echo chamber of what that person's saying, even if they're just like, oh, they see the flawed in the thinking, or they see that, like, it's a blame game, or it's whatever it is.
Yeah.
It's one of those things where it's like, you're not helping the person. You're not helping yourself, and you're not helping them, because there's no reflection. There's no problem solving. There's no moving forward. You're just sitting there. And I get that there's sometimes where someone just needs to vent. I'm down for it. I will, like, be there all day long to be like, let it out. Say what you feel. But here's another thing where, like, we're on, day 3 of that person, or third time that I'm hearing that same shit. And I'm like, what are you going to do about it? Because here's what I'm seeing. And so that's also, though, what I think all my friends at this point know that they're in for. By, like, you're taking chances with me of just me shutting my mouth and holding space. You're really rolling the dice to call me up and have me only as a listener.
Yeah, you're going to get
You're
honest
rolling the
feedback.
dice.
But
I watch it happen all the time, and I know the human behavior danger of it. So I'm like, I'm not doing you any favors. And in this friendship, for you as a person, or for me to sit there and be like, yeah, even though you're like, you can see the, like, fucking neon sign above their head being like, take fucking accountability for your shit too. Yeah. So that's truly it, of, like, start to take a little bit of, like, inventory of how often you're thinking and feeling differently, because there's a way to express that authentically and still be kind and still be loving and still be empathetic. That's the key.
She's a bitch.
Sometimes.
But, like, honestly, I think it's extremely admirable, because it takes a lot of bravery to, like, lean into that. It takes courage to be that.
You get a lot of backlash.
Of course you do.
I remember even, like, back in the day doing things like, someone was cheating on some so-and-so, and you had to be the one because no one else wanted to be the messenger, and you knew you were going to get backlash. And at first they were like, thank you so much.
It's always the person that... That's never
why
nice.
I'm like, that's
a whole different episode.
That's why I'm like, if I have to be the bad guy, but at the end of the day, I know in my heart of hearts that, like, I'm doing what I know is, like, in best practice of, like, what's actually kind. The, like, to be clear is to be kind, to be unclear is to be unkind. Like, if I genuinely know that, I can't not. Like, it's like word vomit. Welcome back.
Which, to all of you, I mean, if you've just been found us, there has been no break, but there has been the longest break that we have ever taken. It is so nice to be back together. We have a lot of exciting content planned, a lot of epic interviews coming up. As we mentioned, we'll have Gina Mazzi on our next interview episode. And if you're not familiar with her, she's an adventure rider in Terrace, just trailblazing the way. She has a really epic story. Cue the lawn leaf blower situation outside just in time.
I was just wondering. I was like, I really hope that's coming in loud and clear for the listeners. Like,
we're just keeping it authentic here. That
could be worse. It could have came in like 45 minutes ago.
Definitely.
And then who knows?
But bear with us 2 more minutes here, because I want to let you know as well that we've been getting content up on our YouTube channel. You can take a tour of Rochelle's True Grit Moto mobile mechanic. It is absolutely fucking ridiculous.
It's just, if you want to laugh, then that's where it's at.
It's so ridiculous, but come see us there. And I'm working on an edit as well of our trip to Belize. And if you've ever thought about riding motorcycles in Belize, there's an amazing woman named Emma, and she owns Alternate Adventures. And so we're going to be taking you along the ride, which, I mean, notably, there's probably going to be shenanigans and idiocy there as well. So make sure that you check that out. And of course, we need your fuel stop before we actually wrap things up here. So
also, a side note, I hear a lot of podcasters say this, so I'm going to say it as well. Of like, if like follow, put a review out. I think there's like a 5-star something.
Yes, give us. I was like,
things.
give us 5 stars, but then I realized no, just a rating is great.
A rating, there it is, because it's one of those things where
It
they all
helps
mention
so
it. Yes,
much.
they talk
It
about
helps
these,
so much.
and then I'm always like,
We're bad at the self promotion, because the thing is,
I'm
it's like, I mean, in the spirit of being authentic, and I think there's no harm in saying like, Lori and I have realized how much we've enjoyed doing this, and we would really love to grow this. And if you don't know, podcasting does take quite a chunk of time. I mean, we've been sitting with you all for about an hour here. When you do the edits, you know, multiply that a couple times because you have to listen to it over and over again. And we fucking love it. But we love it so much. There's a part of us that's like, maybe one day this could actually be a thing that pays some of our bills. And we have appreciated so much looking at our analytics and knowing that we took that pause, that many of you obviously have been sharing this with friends or family, because people still kept coming even though nothing new was coming out. And that makes our hearts so unbelievably full. But we want to
week
keep...
I'm like, really?
Honestly, I'm just like, oh my gosh. Like, I remember when we first started this, we're like, it may just be us listening to us. But like, we've always just been doing this for us. But your support just means so much. And
So
because
just
of
take
that,
a minute.
yeah,
Like,
take a
just
minute.
Literally 30 seconds, I'm assuming that it takes. And so I could be wrong on that, but like everyone's got 30 seconds. And so if you enjoy this and, you know, share with friends, share with family, and take that 30 seconds to just give us a little bit of a shout out there, greatly appreciated.
Brilliant. What's your quote?
I read it this morning, and then I was like,
Oh, she brought an actual.
perfect time.
Okay, we're at story time. Do you remember? It's in a book, so take a look. The Reading Rainbow.
I've got a book, full book in my hand right now, you guys. The Braving the Wilderness, Brene Brown. True belonging is the spiritual practice of believing in and belonging to yourself so deeply that you can share your most authentic self with the world and find sacredness in both being a part of something and standing alone in the wilderness. True belonging doesn't require you to change who you are. It requires you to be who you are. Brene.
Brene. Ready for mine?
Born.
Just be yourself.
Be yourself.
Be yourself. You may be listening to this before. I have to say it because there's gingerbread houses and a holiday tree behind us, but we hope that you have a wonderful holiday season. Our next episode will be Off-Road with Rochelle from True Grit Moto. And on that note...
Oh, I forget what I say. What do I say?
That's related.
That's your motivation. I forgot. Completely forgot.
You've just listened to the Motivation Podcast with your host, Chrissy Van, and me, Lori Joy Kingwell.
Thanks for joining us along the ride. We've got new episodes dropping every Monday, and we're all about community. So follow us on Instagram at Motivation Podcast and visit our website at themotivation.com.
And in the meantime, tanks full and full throttle.